Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. We are back with Dr. Judd Burton, and we're resuming our conversation about zombies. And Judd, a lot of this for me, again, that I wasn't so much of a history folklore person, but we have a sort of an intermittent podcast called Paranormal. And we actually did an episode on zombies and the focus of that, because on that podcast, we look through peer-reviewed material and we just talk about it, whatever the strange topic is. So actual research done on really strange stuff is kind of the angle for that podcast. And, this has actually a serious history, this whole subject. So we might as well go right to Wade Davis and his research. I mean, you could tell us a little bit about him and really what began as doctoral research in this subject, how that just flew into pop culture. It's really quite a story.
Sure. Well, just to sort of synopsize this, Wade Davis was a Harvard ethnobotanist. His interest in Afro-Caribbean culture, specifically the sort of, zombie potion, began really with the sort of rabbit trails that you sort of go down when you're working on your dissertation. You end up with all this sort of precipitate, what do you
I never expected to run into this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I better not pursue that or I'll never get done.
Exactly, yeah. You just have to stop at some point. That was the advice that was given to me. But it sort of became an obsession of his. And
so he hears talk or folklore or whatever about this, some kind of potion, and this is his field. So
right, ethnobotany, is uniquely suited to that sort of thing, because it focuses in as a subdiscipline of anthropology. It focuses in on the native use of plants and medicinals and that sort of thing. But the impetus behind at least part of the funding, as I understand it, is the medical applications of if the right amounts of if this zombie potion recipe,
whatever it is,
could be discerned, would it have medical applications,
right?
And in minute doses, tetrodotoxin can be used, medicinally. So there was certainly his interest, but it was his peers, sort of pushing him, not exactly pushing him, but falling on board with the idea, and that's how he got.
Right, there was some encouragement there.
Right.
So he makes this trip.
A number of whatever you want to call it, medical expeditions or whatever, to the Caribbean in order to discern this potion, and he ended up writing probably the most famous book is The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Yeah, sort of a popularization of his, here's what happened when I went down there, and gives it sort of an Indiana Jones-ish, James Bond-ish.
And it is, the story is kind of like that. It's got that tone to it. It's an adventure, in the dictionary definition sense of the word. And so he writes this series of books, that popularizes his work.
Right. So he finds what it's not a plant. It's actually a fish.
It's actually there are components.
Yeah.
Different components.
There's a cocktail.
Right.
Here,
it's a cocktail. Yeah. But the main ingredient to the recipe is this extract from the puffer fish. The big spiky fish. Yeah. That's actually, there are several, of course, subspecies of the fish, and it's found in different waters around the world. They would take an extract from this fish, from its toxin, and make a powder out of it, dry it out, and mix it with this cocktail. And that, as he found out, was the main ingredient, to make these zombies by design, to allude to our last episode.
So it produces, not a comatose state, but again, this sort of, how would you call it? Just, you're there, but you're not there.
Right.
There's got to be a better word for that.
Of course, the initial, once the toxin takes hold in the system, there are the initial symptoms and, collapsing into a coma-like state.
Like a waking coma.
Right, exactly.
Almost. Yeah.
And as the initial effects wear off and the person regains awareness, but you're still highly susceptible to suggestion because of the effects of this particular dosage that's used in the powder itself.
So the popular version was Serpent in the Rainbow. I mean, his research was really controversial. And I mean, I don't know how long it lasted, but I remember reading journal articles about this that, you know, it's the same drill. You know, well, we can't reproduce this in the lab, so he's lying, or, you know, this sort of thing, or you get mixed results. And there were some that did reproduce it, you know, in the lab. Different people had different reactions to it. But, you know, is it Davis's, pardon the pun, concocting this, or are his colleagues just jealous? Because once he produces the popular version, Serpent in the Rainbow, it just explodes, you know, in pop culture. It winds up being a movie.
With Bill Pullman.
Yeah. I mean, what kind of an impact did that have? Just talk a little bit about that. I mean, once that hits essentially the airwaves.
When it becomes part of the popular consciousness, the movie, that was actually my first exposure to Wade Davis, long before I read any of his work in grad school. I think in a way, I'll speak to the popular element first. I think in a way it clarified exactly what a zombie was from the perspective of anthropologists and ethnologists and people that study culture of indigenous peoples and syncretistic religion, that sort of thing. I think it clarified the definition a bit in the popular consciousness. But for fiction writers and screenwriters and all that, it sort of, I think the effect was probably minimal, because you still have the influences from, you know, like George Romero's work, you know, in zombie movies. You know, and even to this day, that still remains the kind of mainstay for zombie movies and zombie series. But in the popular consciousness, I would say that it clarified the term. It helped people understand better the cultural
what was going on down there.
Exactly. And as to, you know, was he just pulling sleight of hand, or were his colleagues and peers
I mean, he
jealous
published this as a dissertation.
Exactly.
He got his PhD for this. You know?
This is a guy who invested a lot of time, a lot of energy, and, you know, we both know the PhD, the dissertation is just kind of the beginning. Our work, you know, never stops after that. But it's an investment in time and energy, and my sense of the matter is that his work, you know, is legitimate, and you can't really fault him for writing a series of popular books on the subject either. I think because I think for the public awareness, it actually did clarify some things. You know, sort of takes the.
Well, even today, you still have an academic reticence about letting your work fall to the unwashed masses. You know, I mean, the academia has this mentality that we're supposed to maintain some sort of distance for like whatever reason, and so he gets caught up in that too. You know, there's a little bit of a, maybe not personal jealousy, but you're sort of bastardizing good research, and now you're giving it to people who don't even know what's going on. You know, there's this
territorial.
It really is.
Never surprises me anymore how territorial, you know, academics can be, and that's not really, on one hand.
It's like the more people that know about your research, the less quality it is. Like, how does that make any sense?
Exactly,
you know?
And we have a responsibility as academics to interact with the public at large anyway, or else we're just in a sounding chamber. What good does our work do? Yeah,
it's really interesting how you have this with the whole zombie cocktail thing. Again, this was an academic thing. There was a medical interest in this. It's interesting to see how this got into the popular culture, and it went one direction. But if you were 30 years earlier, okay, when it was the military-industrial complex, you know, discovering, you know, LSD, you're basically doing the same thing, taking field trips to these places, talking to local shamans. Hey, what do you do? What does this do? we've heard about this mushroom here that we've never seen before. Can you take us to it? I mean, they were doing this stuff, and this is where LSD comes from. And then that essentially gets weaponized. Just as sort of a non-consenting public experimentation thing. That has its own history, and then this goes off in a different direction. And one is really destructive, and the other one just winds up in movie. You know what I mean? It's just this weird. They're kind of doing the same things, but the histories that emerge from them are just so different.
Yeah, the end product becomes more a matter of public consumption.
Right, and nowadays the zombie thing, has. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the lore and the pop culture, because you get this Hollywoodized version nowadays. You in a conversation that we had prior to this one, you mentioned that now modern zombies are essentially postmodern zombies. So I'd like you to unpack that a little bit, because right now you can't do anything, you can't see anything with zombies if it's not associated with an apocalypse.
Right.
And you would think like the other one would have led to that, the LSD thing, but no, it's this zombie thing, that goes off in that direction.
Sure.
So unpack that a little
Absolutely.
bit. What you mean?
The notion that it's a pathogen that actually causes a disease.
Nowadays it's like World War Z.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the vein of World War Z or The Walking Dead or any number of zombie themed productions. The reason I say that it's postmodern zombie is because it's completely bereft of any supernatural element.
Right. Yeah, there's no shaman here.
Right.
Yeah, something's gone wrong with nature. It's the end of the world as we know it.
It's a kind of artificial, nihilistic, eternity, basically. So it's kind of a postmodern, version of a mummy in some ways. It's that artificial, eternity that this dull, mindless existence brought about by this disease. That's a thread that runs throughout, these programs that we mentioned. Is it reflective of maybe a change in our own culture? Probably so, because as we look at the decline in the practice of not just Christianity, but in some sense, religion in general, belief in any kind of supernatural.
Drift over to materialism.
There's a drift away from that and a drift towards materialism and the purely naturalistic explanations of all manner of phenomena within our culture.
Well, I mean, you see that like with the ancient alien narrative. It replaces, God or gods. Now we just have, aliens, which are part of the natural world. They're just from somewhere else.
Right.
So you see that shift there. And I mean, I can see the shift going on here too, that, just again, culturally, that becomes as bizarre as it sounds, that becomes a more believable narrative.
Right, exactly.
It's just as much fiction as anything else. And just, sort of taking like a kernel of science and then just forgetting about all the limitations of that science and just sort of running with it.
Sure.
But then, that's again more reasonable than this other, religious stuff. So yeah, that makes sense. What about some of the lore, with zombies? Like, I grew up in the 70s. It was Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Right.
They had a zombie episode, and you got rid of zombies by putting salt in their mouth and sewing their lips, shut, and that would terminate them, keep them asleep anyway. So where does some of this stuff, factor in? Because certainly Davis isn't going down there and trying that. I mean, where does this come from? Some of these other ideas.
This brings us back to the apotropaics, the methods of dispatch. And if I remember correctly, that particular episode was rooted in Haitian voodoo.
And so they use that angle.
Yeah, those means are derived from Afro-Caribbean culture. But the methods and means are as varied as cultures are on the globe. The methods for dispatch are a myriad.
Yeah, salt was considered, again, a purative agent. So you have this good light versus dark, good
Mm-hmm.
versus evil kind of thing. So again, for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
but anything that a culture might have that is sort of on the good side,
yeah, if they
could be used against.
they ascribe meaning to it, the
Yeah.
proper kind of meaning, then yeah, it's got a utilitarian element to it, and they can utilize it. They can use it in whatever fashion they deem culturally relevant.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about ascribing, supernatural meaning to material.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a connection then? Just one more question, but
Sure.
again, because of this materialist bent, do you see Serpent on the Rainbow being part of that trajectory?
Not entirely. Like as I said, my sense of it is that it for all that came of it, it did clarify the sort of academic position,
Mm-hmm.
the anthropological, ethnobotanical position on the zombie powder, the zombie, and Afro-Caribbean religion,
Mm-hmm.
in a very general sense.
But it wasn't like an assault on the religious component.
No,
know.
it was it was respective.
Yeah.
It was even the books still had that sort of academic respect for the subjects,
Mm-hmm.
that were consulted and observed,
Mm-hmm.
in the process of his research. But yeah, I still see that as a clarifying sort of thing, if that's possible,
Mm-hmm.
on the subject of zombies. And I think that what we see now, and of course this strain goes all the way back to George Romero's work on zombies, the kind of revenant zombie,
Mm-hmm.
that he used. I think what we're seeing right now is epiphenomenal of postmodernism in terms of what you see in the zombie movies and series and what have you.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a good overview. Just again, for our audience, they can go to our webpage and drill down into some of these things. So thanks for being with us again.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thanks for watching Fringe Pop 321. If you are interested in this topic or any of the other topics that we introduce here on the show, please go to our website, fringepop321.com. And if you're interested in helping us out in donating to what we do, go to fp321.com/S. That's the letter S as in Sam. And please come back and watch other episodes, because what you know may not be so.